Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Well, hello, you good people, and welcome to Life on Earth for June 16th, 2022. And we need to talk about joy and sorrow and love and death and the infinite now. Yes, I promised that long and interesting, compelling title. Can the boy live up to it? Let's find out. See, on the first episode of this show, Life on Earth with Robert and Amy Nasir. This is May 27th, 2021. I opened the show like this. During Ayn Rand's West Point talk, Philosophy Who Needs It, in which she spoke to the graduates of West Point Military Academy, she stated, and I quote, "I am confident enough to think that if you accept the importance of philosophy, it is my philosophy that you will come to accept. Formally, I call it objectivism, but informally, I call it a philosophy for living on Earth," unquote. And what I said at the time was, that being the case, if objectivism is a philosophy for living on Earth, then it stands to reason that, other things being equal, objectivists should be the most successful, the most benevolent, the most positive, the most gracious, the most cheerful, optimistic, happy people on Earth.
I agree.
Well, that is what I said at the time. And yes, I think that is true, but it's not as true. That is, it's not as wise as it could have and should have been.
So it needs a little bit of tweaking, huh?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I need to amend that. And that's what this show is all about. See, here's what happened. And if you've been watching anything on ARCUK, you will see how this ties things together. Last week, on 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir and Amy Nasir on our Sunday show, we talked about the new imperialists, the latest iteration of those who think they know better than you how you should live your life and the impact of that. And then last Thursday, we talked about Sam Harris and his self-proclaimed lack of self and his lack of volition.
I do declare I have no self or volition.
I have no control over what I'm saying, even right now. And we analyzed that and we figured out, based on his latest podcast, what he really means by that, and figured out that where he's going wrong goes much deeper than we thought it did. But that's good, because when you run into Sam Harris and he's saying, you have no self or you have no faculty of choice, now you know. If you haven't heard that episode, definitely worth listening. And then, not us, but on the ARCUK on Tuesday, on Poetry Tuesdays, Kirk Barbera and Maria Lazareva discussed the poem Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens, a poem of introspection and longing and wistfulness and sorrow. This was interesting. And it was fun because, and this is something you should be aware of, even though it was a premiere, meaning it was a pre-recorded episode, Maria and Kirk were in the chat live. So it wasn't like there wasn't anything live going on. And yes, you could talk to them. And yes, they had interesting things to say. This poem, Sunday Morning, from the description by the Poetry Foundation, is a lofty, poetic meditation, almost a philosophical discourse, rooted in a few basic questions. What happens to us when we die? Can we believe seriously in an afterlife? And if we can't, what comfort can we take in the only life we get? Joy, sorrow, love, death, and the infinite now. Now, we're starting to get into transcendent ideas, which might sound a little bit woo. In fact, on an earlier show, I quoted Thomas Jefferson's letter to John Adams, April 8th, 1816. And this was great. Thomas Jefferson says to John Adams, "I have often wondered for what good end the sensations of grief could be intended. All our other passions, within proper bounds, have a useful object, and the perfection of the moral character is not in a stoical apathy, so hypocritically vaunted, and so untruly too, because impossible, but in a just equilibrium of the passions. I wish the pathologists then would tell us, what is the use of grief in the economy? And of what good is the cause, proximate or remote?" Thomas Jefferson, one of the wisest men of the last centuries.
A few hundred years.
Asks John Adams, and this is in 1816. This is just a few years before they both passed away on the same date, July 4th. What is the point of grief? Well, fortunately, I was listening to another podcast that is not an ARCUK podcast, but is still pretty good. Design Matters with Debbie Millman, which I could recommend to you. I put a link in the show notes. Incidentally, the show notes are already posted on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Robert Nasir, or you'll see the link on my Twitter account. And in this latest episode of Design Matters with Debbie Millman is cool. You need to check her out. But she had on the author Susan Cain. Susan Cain was the author of Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. Now, I know that rings true with a bunch of folks out there, certainly with me. Introverts. Yeah. The power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking. The book is called Quiet, but her latest book, and this is why Debbie Millman had her on again, her latest book is called, and here it is, look at that, Bittersweet. Bittersweet, How Sorrow and Longing Make Us Whole. Is
that about 60% chocolate? Cacao chocolate bars.
It's funny you mention that, because I've got the bittersweet chocolate here that goes with my coffee. So
very nice.
I will be totally rude and enjoy some of that during the show. But first, yes, this book, Bittersweet, How Sorrow and Longing Make Us Whole. Incidentally, it says the large print edition there. I do not need a large print edition. My eyes are not shot. This happened to be the only copy that our local library had. I actually took a book out of the library. I haven't done this since I was a kid, which, was a couple of years ago.
Cashing in on all those tax dollars that you paid.
That's right. This is our municipal library, and certainly my tax dollars went to this. And so Bittersweet, How Sorrow and Longing Make Us Whole. Who cares about sorrow and longing? Just sounds wistful and almost whimsical. Who cares? Well, we're going to answer a few questions using information from this book, and it's in a lot of ways, it's a great book. Now, this is not written by an objectivist, but let me pull a couple of quotes from the book just real quick to give you an idea what we're dealing with here. From Susan Cain. How about bittersweet? She says, I've concluded that bittersweetness is not, as we tend to think, just a momentary feeling or event. It's also a quiet force, a way of being, a storied tradition, as dramatically overlooked as it is brimming with human potential. It's an authentic and elevating response to the problem of being alive in a deeply flawed yet stubbornly beautiful world. Most of all, bittersweetness shows us how to respond to pain by acknowledging it and attempting to turn it into art, the way musicians do, or healing, or innovation, or anything else that nourishes the soul. If we don't transform our sorrows and longings, we can end up inflicting them on others via abuse, domination, and neglect. But if we realize that all humans know or will know loss and suffering, we can turn toward each other. This came up in a conversation recently because, let's see if I can find it real quick. I've got so many notes today. It's just crazy. But the issue came up of people who suffer troubled childhoods and then bring it onto the next generation. And my usual response to that is, your attitude should be the buck stops here. Whatever your parents did to you, you should certainly not do it to your children. And decent people don't do that. But it goes deeper than that. And reading this book, I see how it goes deeper than that. Again, this notion, this idea that if we don't transform our sorrows and longings, we can end up inflicting them on others via abuse, domination, and neglect. Now, not all of us are yelling at our children, demeaning them, or worse, striking our children. But how many people do you know fail the cup test? The cup test is you're carrying a cup and it's full to the brim. It's not necessarily full of coffee, it's full of whatever attitude you're carrying around. If you are carrying around anger and bitterness, and somebody accidentally jostles you.
Whoa.
And your cup gets jostled and you spill. And what spills out of your cup? You know, if you are walking around with gratitude and joy, or even if you're not happy in the moment, you know, consolation or longing, then that's what you're going to spill. And you will treat that person who jostled your cup that way. If you're walking around with bitterness, if you're walking around with bile, if you're walking around with anger, if you're walking around with unresolved sorrows and longings, what you're going to give that person who bumped your elbow and spilled your cup is going to be of an entirely different character.
Sounds like that could kind of explain what happens to people on Facebook sometimes in the comments.
Exactly right.
They're
right.
jostled and then they spill out you know, some form of negative stuff, unfortunately.
So I loved the discussion that arose with Kirk and Maria and several people in the chat on Tuesday about that poem Sunday morning, precisely because, well, you know, I've been listening to The Way of Integrity by Martha Beck. And it's fascinating to hear how people who are not religious, but are also not objectivists, are meeting these needs for meaning, purpose, but also transcendence and acceptance and passion. And that's what came out of that Tuesday discussion.
The Tuesday discussion with
Maria
with
and
Kirk and Maria, yeah.
Maria Lazareva and Kirk Barbera. If you didn't see that ARC UK premiere, again, you hear premiere and you think, oh, it's a recording, I can watch it later. But again, this time, if you watch the premiere, Maria and Kirk were on. But if you missed that, it is worth going back and giving it a listen, or at minimum, read the poem. I put links in the show notes so that you can go out and read. It's the kind of thing you read and you think, wow, there's a lot of fluff, a lot of woo, a lot of disconnected concepts. I can see what they're going for, but it's just, I don't have time for this. And then what happens is when you reread it, or you read it more carefully, and you get it, and there's this flood of meaning and content. And even if you are not of one mind with the writer has so much to give you, and you read it in your terms, you make it your own. It's a show definitely worth listening to.
Well, Kirk's in the chat. He says, glad you got something out of the poem on Sunday morning.
I did. I got a lot out of the poem and a lot out of your and Maria's presentation on it. So that podcast with Debbie Millman and Susan Cain was very valuable to me. And it's got me thinking about transcendence. And again, not in a woo way, but just getting above and beyond the basics. And the fact that, again, life on earth is all about how objectivism is the owner's manual for life. So you should be the happiest, you should be the most successful, you should be the most benevolent, you should be the most optimistic and gracious. But also you should be the best at handling. And I don't mean getting rid of, I don't mean getting over, I mean using sorrow and longing. And these are concepts I don't really hear come up much in other contexts. So when Thomas Jefferson says, I have often wondered for what good end the sensations of grief could be intended. Well, Amy, you answered that for us on a previous episode, because you know more about grief, I guess, than Thomas Jefferson did.
I don't know about that, actually. I can't speak for Thomas Jefferson. No, but it's not that. No, I mean, yeah, no, I've dealt with the issue before, you know, loved ones passing away and everything like that. And I've done an entire presentation on how you handle issues of mortality and planning for that, and grief. And yeah,
one thing we've learned the hard way, and you can learn this without going through it. You can read books like this, Bittersweet, and be prepared. But one thing we learned, and we did a whole episode called Sadness, which is linked to in the show notes. Emotions have purposes. Your emotions have work to do for you. No, they're not tools of cognition. Well, what does that mean? They're like extra and fluff? Oh, they motivate you to action. Well, yeah, they do that, but they do much more than that. So let me read Ayn Rand's statement on emotions from The Virtue of Selfishness, from the Objectivist Ethics. Just as the pleasure-pain mechanism of man's body is an automatic indicator, of his body's welfare or injury, a barometer of its basic alternative, life or death. So the emotional mechanism of man's consciousness is geared to perform the same function as a barometer that registers the same alternative by means of two basic emotions, joy or suffering. Emotions are the automatic results of man's value judgments, integrated by his subconscious. Emotions are estimates of that which furthers man's values or threatens them, that which is for him or against him. Lightning calculators giving him the sum of his profit and loss.
Mm-hmm. It's an amazing analogy. Thank you, Ayn Rand.
And what I think sometimes we, and I'll just say me, I don't want to accuse anybody out there of the kind of oversimplicity that I have sometimes been guilty of, but sometimes we think, well, if the basic standard is joy or suffering, then I guess all emotions are either good or bad. Now, all emotions either increase our joy or increase our suffering. And that could not be more wrong. That is the standard, just as life is the standard of value. But you have 170 different emotions, at least in the emotion wheel that I looked at recently. And each one of those emotions is performing a different task for you. As we said in our talk on sadness has work to do. When you are sad, it's not just telling you, oh, there's something you need to resolve. It's actually telling you, oh, here, Kirk is asking about the book.
Yes, I answered.
Your sadness is telling you something, but it's also doing work for you.
Mm-hmm.
When we talked about grief, what grief does is it provides catharsis. Well, what is catharsis? Let me get my note here on catharsis, because I don't want to be too inexact when we talk about difficult emotions.
The process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions.
The process of releasing,
yeah,
and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions.
Now,
Now, in the context of catharsis, the objectivist Felix Mueller once said,
yes,
a lost value needs to be processed out of the expected so a person can live without it. We're talking about catharsis, and Felix said, well, a lost value needs to be processed out of the expected so a person can live without it. In other words, we need to get used to the fact that what we've lost is gone, and not just get used to it as in, we'll get over it.
Yeah,
we need to make it real.
Right.
And not just make real that it's gone, but make real to ourselves also all of the love I felt for it, all that it mattered to me, all of the interesting things I knew about it, this rich context, this relationship I had with that value. You know, in the worst case, a person, but even just a personal value. All of that is different now. And all of those thoughts, all of those connections, all of those networks, and all of those emotions now need to process that fact. Think about when you've lost something, or when you've lost a friend, or when somebody's passed away, and the next day you're looking for them, or you're thinking about them in the present tense, and then you have to remind yourself, oh yeah, that thing or that person is gone.
Right. And what I hear you describing, Robert, is in more terms that objectivists would understand, is integration and or reintegration and introspection.
Those are two elements that objectivists would understand, but there's so much more to it than that.
There is.
Because one of the components of integration is value laden. So in other words, it has an emotional aspect, and that is acceptance. There are facts we know, but that we don't accept. And not because we're evasive, but because the connections are so broad that it actually takes time and it takes work to make it real to ourselves throughout our psychology, and not just our conscious and top of mind awareness. That's why grief matters. Grief isn't just something you can do intellectually. because grief is an aspect not just of your knowledge, but of your psychology. And that's important. That is work to do.
We have a wonderful super chat from Kirk Barbera himself.
Excellent.
$10. And he says, what do you think about how negative emotions work in We the Living? That book is certainly a tragedy, but is also profoundly positive outlook on human life.
It's interesting that you ask that, because one of the things that compelled me to read this book was Susan Cain offered to explain why we like sad music. And I'm still working on her explanation for that, because this idea, it comes down to, I shouldn't say it comes down to, because none of this is simple. It's all rich and nuanced, and I'll talk about that too. But part of it comes down to the fact that, yes, in order to have values in your life, this is one of the take-home points in the notes you'll see, in order to have any values in your life, they need to be achieved. And when we talk about achieving values, it's easy to think about the work, and the work is important, maybe even primary. Well, the thought is primary and then the work, but then all of those connections, the richness of experience, the way in which you share those experiences with your peers, your coworkers, or your family, your friends, whoever else is involved in that value attainment. None of this is as simple as, I want X, I need to move my arms in this way, move my legs in this way, take these actions, and therefore X comes to me. All of life is richer than that, and the best parts of life are much richer than that. And they include the possibility of failure. And more than that, if the values were automatic, if you didn't have to choose them and plan for them, and then execute your plan, and then change your plan if you run into obstacles, and do what you have to do over time to win that job, to fashion that career, or to win that love relationship and then fashion that relationship, or to have your children and then raise, if any of this was automatic, and even if it's playing guitar or playing sports, if any of it was automatic, the obvious side effect is there would be no pride in achieving it. If somebody hands you $1 million, there's a lot of fun things you can do, but the one thing you can't do is say, I'm so proud of having achieved this wealth. And what we learn, because we're objectivists, because we're advocates of Ayn Rand's philosophy, is that no values can be automatic. Mm-hmm. If it's automatic, it's not of value. And the way that plays out, again, if somebody hands you $1 million, you'd say, well, but I'm rational enough that I know how to put that to good use and I'll have a great time. And maybe you're right. But then that's only because of all the other things that you have done, that you have learned, that you have earned. Values cannot be automatic. They cannot just be handed to you. And it's not that life has to be hard in order for values to matter, but it is the case that life is hard. And the same things that make life hard make values matter. This is not a malevolent universe premise that says life has to be like We the Living in order to matter. Life can be mostly good most of the time. But as I wrote in my most philosophical manifesto, I'll just read the first couple sentences. Link, of course, is in the show notes. It comes down to this: live the best life you can. You were gifted a life free and clear. You were born. And as everything is finite, one day you're going to die. So make of your life what you will, as you wish. I won't read the whole thing, but the point is, I can't give you my most optimistic, wonderful perspective on the world without including that simple fact that everything is finite, memento mori, because someday you're going to die. Now, I wish we were all going to die in our sleep. And
At
young
age
enough,
98.
well, but not in 98, young enough that we are still feeling spry,
Yeah, well,
that we didn't
healthy
go to
enough.
sleep with an ache in our bones the night before.
Right.
I wish we would live to be 98, but in the same health as a 25-year-old.
Or 50, I'd say.
But unfortunately, mortality doesn't work that way. We will
Yeah.
all know pain. We will all know suffering. And even if you're a great athlete and you're in great condition and you take the best care of yourself and you eat all the right stuff,
Yeah, but
people you care about, people that you love are going to go through crisis.
right.
They're going to go through pain.
But I think there's a key difference to having a benevolent universe premise kind and pro-reason, pro-individual rights, pro-rational egoistic philosophy, such as objectivism, versus having some sort of mishmash of altruistic morality with some malevolent sense of life, with some supernatural metaphysics, and you're not so I think there's a big, is that philosophy, as we all should know here, it makes a huge difference in your life. And so when you do have those moments where you lose somebody or lose a value, or start losing your health when you're getting older, and you're having to kind of reintegrate and reprocess these new parameters, as some people call it, the new normal. But you lose things, like you lose a loved one, for instance. And my question to you earlier was, and I'll get back to the philosophy point because I have an integration with that, but what should you expect of yourself in terms of, I've lost somebody very close to me. What do I expect, or how do I expect my grieving will go, and how long will the grieving last? And, or is that not a valid question?
It's a valid question, but it doesn't have a single discrete answer. So your grieving won't last 27 days. The question you can ask is, well, will my grieving be long or will it be short? Yeah. What I often tell people when somebody passes away is, may your grief be short and your memories be long. But you can't say, may you not have any grief. And may it all just be good memories.
Right.
Because again, your sadness has work to do. Your grief has integrations to make. How long will it take? Depends on the loss. Depends on your psychology. Depends on how deeply you care about the person or the thing that was lost. So there's no easy answer to that. All I know is that the better your acceptance of the fact of grief,
yeah,
and if you spent some time studying the phenomenon and reading stories, that may be one of the values of reading a story like We the Living. The more experienced you are with that, the better it will go. But that doesn't mean it's going to go quick. Mm-hmm. You could be a grief counselor and you will still experience grief. Just like psychologists seem to need psychologists as much as or more than most people.
Yeah, so I mean, this goes back to philosophy in terms of
everything does.
Of course, it depends on how big the value was that you lost, how integrated that value was in your life. Say it's your mother as opposed to a friend of a friend at work is going to be a difference in terms of the length of grieving. Because it depends on how much they've affected your life or was a part of your life. But I think that because I've noticed, and I'm sure people here have noticed, that if you don't have kind of an expectation of yourself to pursue values, to be a thoughtful, integrated, virtuous person in terms of philosophically virtuous person. If you don't have that expectation of yourself that, you can get through things, it's going to take some time and you have to be realistic with your grief. And you're not, if you're reality focused and if you're reason focused, you try to find words and you try to introspect and you do the work. things are going to be a heck of a lot, a lot easier for you than, say, somebody who is the opposite and is not looking for reasoning things out or introspecting or finding facts or understanding what the words are behind emotions and so on and so forth, and have a really bad philosophy.
One thing's for sure, the practice of repression is not part of objectivism.
Right. But it's also, what's also not part of objectivism, I think, and in some terms or another, is the idea that you have an expectation that you're going to just grieve forever. That, that feeling when you get real sad and then you start crying, and then you think to yourself, well, if I cry more, maybe my grief will go faster, or maybe I should cry more because life is just suffering. Life is just so terrible, and therefore that's going to kind of reinforce my negative emotional experiences. So I think it really depends on, again, how important that value was to you, and what your epistemological habits are in terms of introspection.
Yes. So I didn't mean to spend so much time on grief, but it's just one of the bittersweet experiences that we have, that we need to accept. And in the moments when it needs to be experienced, and needs to be embraced, for as long as it needs to last to get you to the state you need to be in. And I've said before, some of these difficult concepts, like longing or grief or sorrow, even sadness, if objectivism is the owner's manual for life, we need to have these concepts in our arsenal. We need to have these experiences in our arsenal. And we need to accept this about ourselves. The last thing we want to do is be guilty of what nowadays is called toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is when somebody's going through something rough and you tell them, oh, chin up, fly right.
Fuck up. NLP,
Toxic positivity is a type of evasion.
Yeah.
Now, you've heard me talk about positivity, and I'm all for positivity. I'm the first guy to tell you how to change your state in a heartbeat at any given time, but sometimes you need to be there with your emotions. You need to let them do their work. Here's a quote that I'm going to have Amy read because I can never pronounce the gentleman's name properly.
Oh, okay. Sorrow is one of the vibrations that prove the fact of living, by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the same gentleman who wrote Le Petit Prince, or The Little Prince.
Right. Sorrow is one of the vibrations that prove the fact of living. Now, every time somebody talks about vibrations or frequencies, I get in trouble because I have no idea what they're talking about. But in this case, I know exactly what he's talking about. Sorrow is one of the vibrations that prove the fact of living. As I say, if you're alive, and if you want to stay alive, then you are going to have to achieve values, and that will not be automatic. You are not infallible. You will not always succeed. And even if you are the most efficacious man you've ever met, or a woman that you've ever met, people that you care about are going to go through things. The fact of death, we can say, well, I've got the state of mind in which I am going to meet my death with dignity and grace. I'm going to make it easy on everybody around me. I'm going to make it easy on myself. That's me. That's what I intend to do. News for you young people out there, and I'm sorry if this hits some folks too close to home, but your death isn't going to be the worst thing in your life. Because before you die, your parents are going to die. And God forbid, for some folks, your children may predecease you. Your own death isn't the worst thing you will go through.
Your pets.
So it's easy to say, oh, I don't care about grief. I'm up for that. I don't care about death.
Yeah,
I got it all figured out and all planned. Yes, I'm sure you do.
Power through.
It's why kidnappers know not to kidnap you. They kidnap your kids. They kidnap your wife. They kidnap people you care about. You can't evade sorrow by saying, well, I'm bulletproof. because I am. I happen to be one of those bulletproof people. It's why my ego is purely healthy. People like what Susan Cain would say, Robert doesn't have an ego. I say, no, my ego is bulletproof. I don't care who insults me. I don't care who gives me art. Trouble is, if you insult my daughter, if you insult my wife, I will fall apart and I will be all over you. So don't tell me, oh, don't worry, I'm bulletproof. Nobody who cares about anything is bulletproof in that sense. I did find the earlier discussion I mentioned. This was actually from Jim Ashley on Facebook, who wrote under the topic, and it's a longer discussion. You can look it up on Facebook, but he wrote, sabotaging happiness. The normal progression of a child's life to adulthood and a happy, productive life is sadly sabotaged by so many parents with the help of the schools and churches and the culture. Not to say that as adults, the children who have been subjected to this kind of abusive parenting are not self-responsible. They still are. The truth is that they had a responsibility to themselves to reject any ideas that would only bring pain and suffering if lived by. The individual, certainly a full-grown individual, has free will. But to challenge the very ideas you are being taught when you're very young is extremely difficult. Yet it is necessary at some point if you value your future and want a happy life. Which I could only respond, and it goes on. It's a very good essay that Jim wrote. And I said at the end, indeed, break the cycle. It's not easy, but the alternative is slowly going from being a victim to being a perpetrator. Again, it's very easy to say, well, I'm not going to make any of these mistakes and I'm going to have a perfect life. I don't need to be a master of sorrow. I don't need to know how to deal with suffering and let sadness do its work. And any of you folks who, like me, are young and cocky and thinking, yeah, that's me, trust me on this one.
Yeah, and by the way, there are a lot of books on grieving.
There are many books on grieving. Again, I don't want to get too hung up on grieving because that's only one element of what we're talking about.
But it's interesting psychologically. If you're into that thing, there's actually a book that's really good called How to Go on Living When Someone You Love Dies.
Yes.
By Therese A. Rando. And anyway, just fascinating stuff.
Yes. And again, grief is a great example of something that a lot of people want to shrug off. Yeah, objectivists should never shrug unless they have the world on their back. Another quote from Susan Cain here. She's talking about the professor of psychology, Laura Christensen from Stanford. Poignancy, she told me, is the richest feeling humans experience. One that gives meaning to life. And it happens when you feel happy and sad at the same time. I want to read that from the beginning again, and you tell me if this makes you think of an observation that has been made elsewhere in objectivism. Poignancy, she told me, is the richest feeling humans experience, one that gives meaning to life. And it happens when you feel happy and sad at the same time. It's the state you enter when you cry tears of joy, which tend to come during precious moments suffused with their imminent ending. When we tear up at that beloved child splashing in a rain puddle, she explains we aren't simply happy. We're also appreciating, even if it's not explicit, that this time of life will end, that good times pass as well as bad ones, that we're all going to die in the end. I think that being comfortable with this is adaptive. That's emotional development. Unquote. And that is part of why sad songs work for us. The people who sing us sad songs or play sad orchestral music are not just saying, as a lot of us think about sad music, there's somebody who gets it. There's somebody who's been where I am. They're also telling us there is a richness to this. This passion that you feel, even though it's sadness, is also the measure of the value, the measure of the love that you feel. the measure of your passion, the measure of your engagement, the measure of your attachment, all of the ways in which this matters, whether it's this romance or this adventure or this life. Susan Cain writes, longing is momentum in disguise. It's active, not passive, touched with the creative, the tender, the divine. We long for something or someone. We reach for it, move toward it. The word longing derives from the Old English langen, meaning to grow long, and the German langen, to reach, to extend. The word yearning is linguistically associated with hunger and thirst, but also desire. In Hebrew, it comes from the same root word for passion. Now, it's interesting because a lot of us think, well, I don't want sadness. I don't know if I want poignancy, not the kind that brings tears to my eyes, gets me all choked up. But I kind of do want longing. I can see that's aspirational. Maybe that'll make me motivated, ambitious. And I certainly want yearning because that's motivating me too. And I do want desire because that sounds sexy. And of course I want passion. And what I'm learning, what I've learned over the course of time, and I'm still sometimes figuring out, is that you don't get one without the other. And again, it's not that you have to be sad in order to be happy. But you do need to be willing to play on the field of values in which both sadness and happiness are going to happen to you. That's why we're not Stoics.
True. Yes.
So my takeaways for you, and if there's anything I've missed in the chat, let me know.
Well, we have a lot of
there seem to be a lot of poignant stories in there,
yes,
and I'm glad to see that people are very much in touch with the value significance of the challenges they've met.
Yes, and and by the way, just a little disclaimer: neither Robert nor I are psychologists or psychiatrists.
Don't even play one on TV.
So take our recommendations, within your context of knowledge, of course. But yeah, I mean, we've got, a lot of people have, this is something that we, as an objectivist, we really don't talk about.
No.
And I think that we should, and, in many months past, we've done a number of episodes on our 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir Sunday podcasts at 6 p.m. Eastern time.
That's true.
With regard to sadness, why it's important to feel sadness, even crying. Why it's important to cry.
That was one of my favorites. We did a show called Tears of Splendor.
Yes.
What's your overwhelm? And the question was, what gets you choked up? What gets you overwhelmed? What really hits you so hard the tears come? And not things you're sad about, but stuff that gets you.
Yeah, or songs that get you.
It rose out of Dr. Leonard Pegoff's observation about tears at a wedding, because he noted that when somebody cries at a wedding, what's happening there, or what's often happening there, is they're intensely sad that life isn't like this. That this is so unusual, it's so beautiful, it's so magnificent, but life isn't like that. And I think he was right, or at least he was onto something very important. But I think there's more to it than that. And again, we get this idea of bittersweetness, which I think Susan Cain does a pretty good job explaining. As usual, when I read these books, Susan Cain and Martha Beck and any non-objectivist writers, right away I want an objectivist to come along and rewrite it in fully rational terms. But I don't know, we're not quite there yet. And that's why I can't resist bringing some of this to you. So my takeaways for the episode, and I could go on like this for hours. I've got hours of notes here, but I'm going to jump right to the end.
All right.
And the takeaways are listed in the show notes. So, hey, you could read along at home, but my takeaways: sadness drives creativity. This is something you have to read the book to get the full idea of.
I've seen this happen.
It's interesting. The author's favorite composer of lyrical music is Leonard Cohen. If you're familiar with Leonard Cohen's work, it goes well beyond the Hallelujah song, although that's not a bad example of what we're talking about. You can see why she realizes that sadness drives creativity. It's interesting because I've made the point before, the reason why there's so much bad news on the news is that good news isn't news. And what I mean by good news isn't news, occasionally there's a great discovery or a new gadget that comes out and that's news. But people waking up in the morning and brushing their teeth and eating breakfast and going to work and driving home and not getting in a car accident, and then they come home and they enjoy a television program or they spend time with their family, that's not news. Even though that's 99.9% of what happens every day, all the time. No, for it to be news, something tragic needs to happen. And the same thing happens with a lot of songwriters, and several of them have written about it, and Susan Cain talks about it in the book. When everything's going great, they don't have anything to say. Now you can celebrate, and there's some great celebratory music. But when things are going badly, and I don't mean badly as in disasters, just when you're sad, when you're experiencing grief, or when you're facing challenges, or when you're really longing for something, that's when you've got something to say. That's when there's stuff in there ready to come out, because you can't take action yet, but it's still in there. You still feel that drive. So sadness drives creativity, and it drives action. Advice to objectivists: do not dismiss your own metaphors or synonyms, sadness, your weaknesses, the richness in here, your own we the living stories. Mm-hmm. Don't wallow in it. Just let it be part of the richness of your life that it is.
Right. And there are some examples in the chat right now of people who have lost. Actually, let me just tell you a little personal story of mine. I grew up without a dad, and my mom was okay when I was very young, but it just started getting really bad when I was a teenager. And anyway, long story short, she had a history of mental illness. She died when she was 65. It was very, very, very sad. And but anyway, I was angry. I was not happy at the who I was brought up by, and the area that I was brought up in, the people that I was brought up around, is not happy, very, very angry. And I realized that, for many years, especially in my 20s and my 30s even, I thought, well, I don't feel like I can grieve something I've never actually experienced. And I thought about that, and it actually, I can't grieve having, coming from a loving family, with cousins and uncles and aunts, and who everybody just showering me with gifts and love, and camping trips for, and family reunions and things I had never experienced really. So, but the thing is that, yes, you can grieve that. You can grieve the fact that you never had it, that the fact that, it would have been better for you if you were, when you were growing up, to have a loving family. And in my 20s, I just felt, phooey, I'm going to have friends and other people, and Robert and my stepdaughter Diana and all these people be my new family. But I didn't quite process it right, because I was grieving not having a family, even though I hadn't experienced what exactly that was like. So don't, it's not wrong to grieve for that, for something that you never really experienced. It is something that you need to process, and something you need to put words to, and it needs so yeah. So anyway, just FYI. I'm just going to say that. All right.
Yes. I'm now looking at the chat, and there's so many good comments in there, and some funny ones too. Thanks to Johnny. Appreciate your super chat there. He says, just wanted to say thanks. We thank you for that. And it's interesting. Dale says, I can't sing the naval hymn anymore. I'm not a sailor, but the images it evokes are too powerful and I always choke up. Dale, I have the same experience. I mean, I've that experience. I have to remember if I go to a karaoke party or a bar, there are certain songs I think, I love these songs. I can't sing them. I can't get through them without getting choked up.
Yeah.
And again, that episode we did, Tears of Splendor, we named a bunch of those kinds of things. And I do appreciate you mentioning that.
Oh, in the show notes, you mentioned the Delta Blues.
Yes.
Which I can sing, which, by the way, that was the only thing that I could even wrap my mind around when my mom died.
Yes.
I just listened to the Delta Blues. That's why we got some
Robert Johnson
action up there. Oh, where is he? There he is.
Yeah.
And so I listened to him, and it was cathartic. It helped me. It calmed me down. It helped me put words to my emotions. And it also made me feel like I wasn't the only one in the universe feeling what I was feeling, because the intensity was really great. So,
right.
So yeah, music does help, the right kind.
Yeah. All right, let me finish the wrap up. I want to talk to the people in the chat some more, but I got to finish the wrap up here. Again, takeaways: sadness drives creativity. Let it do that. Do not dismiss your own metaphors, synonyms, sadnesses, weaknesses, richness. Do not dismiss or repress or evade your own stories. Think of the copper pot story. Objectivists do not repress their values.
Yes.
Even if they include substantial elements of sadness, or grief, or longing. Sadness has a purpose. Sadness has a crucial role to play. It has work to do, so let it do that work. There is no passion without values, and values cannot be automatic, neither in their choosing, nor in their attainment, nor in the holding, or building, or growing, or keeping, or the preservation of your values cannot be automatic. And that means there will be losses. And that is as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, something I promised in the show title, even though I've got work to do on this one. It is simultaneously true that now, right now, is everything. All you ever have is this moment, the present. The only time you're ever living is when you are living right now. And yet at the same time, yesterday, today was tomorrow, and tomorrow, today will be yesterday. So live in the moment, live in the present, live richly, live deeply, with your eyes wide open and your arms wide and your passions elevated and fully exposed and ready for sorrow and pain and whatever else is going to hit you. And yet at the same time, live with an eye and a plan and enthusiasm for the future. And with respect and acceptance of your past, because that is what you are. And if you've ever loved anyone, whether it's the way you loved your parents, or the way you love your children, or the way you love your heroes, you damn well better love yourself at least that well. To respect you right now, to respect the future, and to respect your past. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, can I put in one Ayn Rand quote real quick?
Please.
Yeah, so do not lose your knowledge that our proper state is an upright posture. Oh, I got to pop up on my... an intransigent mind and a step that travels unlimited roads. Do not let your fire go out, sparked by irreplaceable spark in the hopeless swamps of the approximate, the not quite, the not yet, the not at all. Do not let the hero in your soul perish in lonely frustration for the life you deserved, but have never been able to reach. Check your road and the nature of your battle. That's what we're talking about. Checking our road and the nature of our battle right now is introspection, processing, integration, all of that. The world you desired can be won. It exists. It is real. It's yours. And for those in the chat who are lamenting the fact that we're not living in a very good political system right now. First of all, it could be worse. So count all the blessings that you can for what we have, because we do actually have a lot still.
And I'm going to go a step further, because you're right. And I've said this before. Amy has said this before. But I'm going to say something that I don't usually say. I've only mentioned it in passing and haven't really given it what it deserves. If you look out in the world right now and you let it make you angry, and you let it make you sad, and you let it make you indignant, that's okay. That's all right. That is as it should be. Now, I've said 97% of your time should be spent on values, on the positive, on joy, on pursuing what you want, on getting what you want out of life. And I'll say 3% of your time needs to be spent addressing the negatives, protecting yourself against disvalues, supporting organizations that are fighting in your name. And I say 97.3, which is intentionally a bit of an exaggeration, but not too much. But what I want to say today, and in line with what Amy is saying, is I don't mean that 3% to sound dismissive. And when we're talking about your personal sorrows, your personal pains, the challenges of your personal life, and not the people out there that are just making things harder for you, I'm sure it's more than 3% for most of us. I hope it's more than 3% for most of us, because I want that kind of rich life. I want you to have the kinds of passions you can only have if you're willing to accept that there will also be sorrows.
Yes. Very good, Robert.
So thank you for joining us.
Yes.
I got nothing else to say. Again,
I have more to say.
I have a ton to say, but I've got pages of notes here. I'm not going to go any longer. It's been an hour. You know what I've got to say. You know what the rest of it is going to sound like. But if you're curious, if you're like, no, I want more, let's go to Clubhouse. So we're going to wrap it up here. We will see you on Clubhouse in just a moment. Thank you for joining us for Life on Earth. We hope you are enjoying Life on Earth, and we will see you in a week.